And by the way, welcome to
So
the
it's
show.
good to be here. Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about the show, and I'm like, Josh has like sits in the middle of the Venn diagram of like, chef. So like fully intimate, experience in restaurants, and then you ran a restaurant, so owner, and then you were CEO of RFI. So you were running multi-content, multi-units, and now you're running. It's just like so. I was looking at all your guests and like, holy shit, there's just so much relatability because you've
It's a,
just
it's
done so
a
many things.
it's a big ecosystem out there.
It's wild. It's wild how small it is too.
But it is crazy. I remember, like, I totally remember the day you walked into my restaurant
Yeah,
and you were like selling tattle. It was very early days, by the way, like very early days.
like sad and scary and dim.
But good too, right? And I just remember like,
Yeah,
like, oh, I'm gonna use this. I don't care. Like this dude's awesome. And you came in, you helped set the thing up, and you were talking about it, and it was just you. I think it was you, and you had a prior CTO or something, and it was like maybe just you two.
yeah. And at one point, it was just me for like a couple of years. So I would always refer to
Jesus.
Tattle as like the royal we. Like, yeah, wait, we'll fix that feature for you. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
Well,
get
yeah. You
that to
got to say
you.
we. Yeah.
And they're like, who is? I started Tattle. I mean, probably 2011.
Oh, that early? Wow. Yeah, because it was like
Yeah,
2014, I think, when I met you. The other thing I remember, which still to this day is so true, that all like kidding aside, man, like you were so helpful, like strangely helpful, overtly helpful all the time. And actually, you are like that to everybody.
I try not to think of my experience as unique, but I feel like it was intensely painful for so long that I I just lived like I lived in, just like my dad would always say, like, he doesn't even have a pot to piss in. He just keeps building this app thing. Like it was, it
Yeah.
was not a great, I wasn't in a great place for a very long time. So anyone that I see who's like, who has the itch, or like, you can just see them like tussle with the idea of like, should I leave like my prescribed job with my,
Yeah.
repeatable income, with my like ability to plan for the future? And then there's another part of them that's like, but I have this idea. And like, that's a whole other part of them that like they haven't like encountered yet. So
Yeah.
I love being helpful because it's maybe selfish. Like I do enjoy helping people, and it feels good to do that. But then it's also amazing just watching people just like evolve over the years and do something that they always wanted to do but didn't think they could do it. And for me, that's like I love watching people go through that because it's no one really helps you. Like you get people like maybe they redirect you off course for a little bit, but like no one's living your day to day, like the struggle. So
Yeah.
if I can do that for a little bit with someone, like I know it, when people did that for me, it went a really long way and I never forgot it. So
Yeah.
it's really just
Yeah.
like paying it forward when it happens.
Well, I mean, I vividly remember. First of all, I remember liking you right away because I come from the kitchen where for 15 some odd years I just worked 100 hours a week for basically no pay. Like it averaged out to like $4 an hour,
Yeah.
and you just grind all the time because you love this thing and you want to get better. And I saw you
Mhm.
grinding, and I was like, wow, people grind outside the kitchen too? That's pretty cool. At least this guy does. And
Uh-huh.
then, I didn't leave a job, I haven't had a job in a very, very long time because, I left cooking to start, my first business in 2008. But like, I started telling you about this idea. I was like, man, like, I need this thing. It's not, no one has it. And I think I should just like sell my restaurants and do this thing. And you were like, fuck yeah, you should do that. And on top of that, I don't know if you remember this, but you're like, okay, you're gonna need a deck. And I was like, okay, that's like I'm used to business plans in a restaurant. You have like a business
I don't
plan,
remember
and
that.
and you
Yeah.
you built my first deck for me.
Did
So
I?
like a template. You're like, here, this is, and actually, then you
That's
started putting
so
in some of the
funny.
things too.
Yeah.
I'm sure I have it. I'm on this call. I might try to look for it. I'm sure I have it, by the way. And it was like a PowerPoint or something, and it was really
Yeah.
janky. But you're like, dude, just you need something that's simple. And I'm like, first of all, I had no idea that that's
That's
what you
so
needed.
funny.
Market size and TAM and
Yeah. Yeah.
all these things. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. And you just, you went out of your way to like to do that and to send that to me. On top of like making some introductions. By the way, I had dinner a couple nights ago. It's like New York Tech Week, and Mike
I heard.
Montero
Yeah.
was at the dinner we were at. He's one of
Love
our
Mike.
investors. I met Mike sort of through you because I met Mike through David Oak.
Who
You
I
introduced
met.
me.
Yeah, yeah, same person I met Mike
Yeah.
through. Yeah.
I am curious, man, like what drives you to be so helpful? Because I met a lot of people along the way now in this new
Yeah.
world of food tech that they're like, oh yeah, Alex, he's awesome. He helped me with this, or he introduced me to this person, or he did this, and I'm like, man, this guy's just like always helping people. Like, where do you think that stems from?
This is really lonely. Like it's awful. A lot of
Yeah,
it is, I mean, it's very rewarding and you're so grateful when anything is going right. And you're so grateful that like you have a team of people that hopefully enjoy working for you. But like for the most part, like, I don't know, maybe like 50 to 60% is like extremely difficult, like
it's very isolating.
emotionally
Yeah,
draining. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is like, I don't know, my parents have always been just like wildly supportive of anything that we've ever wanted to do. I feel grateful from that extent too, where I don't know if that's always like the balance of people growing up, but my parents were entrepreneurs. So it was always like, what do you want to do? Like, is it risky? Like, do you want to get better? Do you want to improve? Do you want, so it's always like that kind of mentality. And I think some people have the itch, but they don't have like the disposition or just like they just didn't grow up in a home maybe that was that supportive. So I always feel that I have to pay it forward in some way because everyone who has the itch like you within them has like a far like less maximized version of themselves that they just like haven't tapped into.
but you also sort of you do oftentimes, at least I've seen, like go above and beyond. Is that something that your parents also do, or that you saw?
I think, yeah, I mean, just being very supportive. Like I remember early days Tattle, it was like Tattle was like I started doing Tattle in 2011 and I was living in like an apartment with like, you know, five other roommates in a small 8x8 room, no windows. And like, I was like, I'm going to have to do this the next 3 years. And like, that's amazing, Alex. That's so great. Like, this is so excited for you. Like, this is going to be a really fun journey for you. So I always feel like they're bringing perspective I didn't have initially. I think that this job is more rewarding when you can help others be in your seat. And cathartically, it's nice to be surrounded by people who like are on a similar journey because you can relate to each other far more. And I love having a network of people that I could do that with. It's like probably the selfish reward too.
It's funny you bring this up because I was actually thinking about this recently, just finding more ways to just be more helpful now, like just later
Yeah.
on in my career. It is really rewarding, to
Oh my
help
God.
people.
It's the most rewarding. I mean, I used to look up like greatly to anyone that was helping me, like, oh my God, I can't believe this person. Like they actually have a product, they have a team, they have funding, they have customer, like, oh my God, they're growing. Like, oh my God, like how like I want to do that. How do I get to do that? So and then you do it and it's hard, but like it's not as hard if you just keep doing it every single day for a very long time. And I think people at the early start, they always underestimate how long it will take, how hard it will be. And that's why I'm just so overly helpful because like that little piece of help could be like the dopamine hit they need for the next like 2 weeks just to get through something horrible. And you
Yeah,
just need to give that to people, I think, as they're on this journey.
yeah. The right to learn, or the entitlement to learn, is something that you have to like earn. You don't just get to learn. You have to work pretty hard to learn things. You have to go out of your way to learn things. And
Mhm.
I find that I also get really juiced and excited when I'm helping somebody and I see that they're actually putting in the work and then coming back and following up and things
Yeah.
like that. I think it's such a different experience when you help somebody and then they just ask for more and they haven't really like shown. And I think that that's something, at least for folks, like maybe younger, or what have you,
Yeah.
the more you want to learn, like the more you should show like how you're taking the things that you've already gotten help with
Right.
and applied them, because that also is like really exciting when you help somebody. You send them a deck, right? Like, here's a template, and then they
Yeah.
do something with it and say, hey, I actually showed it to this person, da, da, da,
Yeah.
as opposed
Yeah.
to like just keep asking you for more and more help.
Wildly rewarding.
Yeah,
And also sometimes surprising. You're like, holy shit, I know that. Like, oh, I know exactly what to do here. Like, I had no idea I was sitting on that information. And then we're like, then you're like, wow, I think I might know things that I didn't
Yeah,
realize could be useful to someone else. And you're like, holy shit, like, how do I give this away? Like, how do I give it, how do I provide any guidance that could be useful? Like, how do I? And then I think that gets really fun when you're like, wow, I know a lot. It's helping someone. They seem to enjoy it. And then it's like a whole other rewarding aspect of the role that you had no idea when you first started that this could be the
yeah,
case.
yeah, 100%. Well, going back to what we were saying earlier, I remember like 2014 when you were, grinding in Tattle. You're probably eating ramen every day. You did that for quite a while.
Chicken and beans. Yeah.
Yeah. How has like the grind like changed for you over the last decade? Because you still work your ass off. I know that, but like, what's changed?
It's so funny, like the different stages of your business, like, and then who you are and have to be within those stages. Like, it's always
Yeah,
constantly changing, but it's almost like outside of just like the roles, responsibilities, which are like, whatever, they'll always change, but like your literal temperament and acceptance of things like changes dramatically. Like that, I
yeah,
think is the hardest part that like is not spoken about enough. It's not like, oh, I have to recruit, I have to train, I have to fundraise. Like those are like the above water, like obvious sort of like ever changing responsibilities. But like the toughest part is like beneath it, which is like I have to speak non-violently to people when I want to voice a complaint in a way that I didn't know how to do 5 years ago. Like I have to read non-violent communication to understand how to make an argument without offending everyone. Like, so I feel like the grind used to be in the early days just keep the company alive, which still is, but like get customers, get revenue, try to bring in capital to give yourself some kind of time frame. So like that's a grind in and of itself. And you really are operating in like this unforgiving manner. You're just like, I'm working my ass off. I'm doing whatever it takes to like prove that I can exist. And then you hopefully can get to a place where like you can decompress a little bit and then begin to plan outside of like looking at every 30 days is like, is this going to be it? Like, are we going to
yeah,
get that 10K check? Are we going to so like that's really, really hard. And I would say early days, like it's really tough to be so sensitive to everyone else's needs and emotions on the team when you're like not paying yourself. You're trying to move the company forward and you're trying to understand deeply every single role and how you would scale that role into like a bigger system one day.
yeah. It's so true. It's very difficult in the beginning, and I've failed at this in several businesses to like think about the happiness, the morale, the efficacy of your team
Yeah.
as opposed to the efficacy of like the results of the company. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
is my team happy? Are they motivated? Do they know exactly what they need? Do they,
Right.
how do they feel like contributors? That's stuff that like early on, it's so hard to like think about because you're like just in go
Yeah.
mode. And it
Definitely.
does have compounding effects if you get it when you get it right. And usually we start to
Yeah.
like later than we should because now that's like almost all I think about. I mean, that's not, I mean, obviously there's so many other things we have to think about as well, product and growth and
Yeah.
fundraising. And
What you're trying to maximize everyone else's productivity, their
yeah,
commitment,
yeah,
their creativity, whatever it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most important metrics of success, is growth. It's just like, is your team happy and do they feel productive?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And do they feel like
Yeah.
they can achieve the goals that you set? And you don't think about that early on.
It doesn't matter as much early on. It does, and it doesn't. It's just like the whole company is fighting to live. Like
Yeah, yeah,
your thing right now, it's so tough to
yeah,
fight. Like you're in like you're just putting your head down. You're trying to survive. It's really tough to survive in like just like a survivalist mode for a really long time, and consider all the delicacies of how complex people are and their
yeah,
needs and their
yeah,
wants and their aspirations. It's so tough to balance that relative to like we have to get through the next 6 months. So
yeah, yeah. And I think
yeah,
that, one thing that I find helpful to tell folks is like in the beginning when you launch, even when you first start getting some paying customers, it's still an idea for quite a while.
it's for
Like
many years. Yeah, it's
you don't quite have a business yet, and I think it takes quite a while to be like, okay, yeah, now there's a model here that like
yeah.
that works, and we can. And the other thing I think, it's funny because I heard the CEO of NVIDIA say this recently. Isn't that
He
recent?
has some wild quotes.
Yeah, but the one
Yeah,
thing he said that like really resonated with me is like it doesn't get easier, it gets harder. And I think people, he tells, and I tell everybody the same thing, like, don't start a business. I can tell everybody, don't do that. If I tell you that and then you still go do it, cool, that's awesome.
yeah,
But it's not just hard in the beginning. there's a different kind of hard. Just like you have to be a different person as your company grows.
Yeah.
It's hard always. It's just different kinds of hard. I mean, there are like lifestyle businesses that I think you can probably do that over time. I think do become way more manageable, and that's cool. That's actually pretty awesome. But if you're trying to really scale something that's going to have like a massive impact on a lot of people or businesses, it doesn't get easier. It just gets harder. It's just a different kind of hard.
No, it's funny you say that. So like, for the first 3 to 4 years of Tattle, we're struggling to survive. We finally start hitting some pay dirt. We start bringing on some big customers. We grow pretty dramatically, like, you know, throughout 2019. And it's just like a ragtag team of people, like 5 people in the company. And we're like the once like ragtag crew fighting to survive. Now we're successful and we were mostly backed by like angels, right? And like the expectation of angels is like, this is a 9 to 10 year journey. So like what unpronounced pressure am I going to be putting on you like year 2 or 3 into the ride? Like it's not warranted yet. So like, that's always like, I feel like the heyday of a
Yeah.
startup. And then I feel as though it gets harder in time because the expectations of the business evolve as you bring on capital partners that have different expectations for how you need to grow. So like, I remember just feeling moving from purely angel backed, like investing in a dream, to moving to institutional investors was like grief. Just because everything now you have to view through the lens of something that's a bit more critical. Like, are these the right people? Is this the right plan?
Yeah, I was talking about this with Brandon Barton from Byte at one of the episodes, and I think this is also something that's really important for people to consider. Is there's different instruments of capital, and venture capital is one avenue, but there's lots of others. Not lots, but there are others, right? Private equity. There's loans from there's SBA loans and things. There's
Yeah, for
different
sure.
ways to get capital, family offices, whatever the case may be. But
Right.
like they have different trajectories, and you have to know what trajectory you're getting on when you
Right.
when you bring on
Right.
capital.
Which will
Because
dictate your pressure, no doubt.
yes, because
Yeah.
if you raise venture capital, the expectation is that your company should return their fund, and that means that when you raise venture from at least a top tier firm, they might have a $500 million fund, right? And then over time, they expect they'll have 10% of your business when there's an exit, right? So they
Right.
want that 10% to be equal to $500 million, you know?
Right.
So $5 billion exit is the expectation. So growing nicely and being profitable over the course of 10 years, and let's just say that you grow to become $1 billion company. I mean, I think that would probably still be good for them, but let's just say you grow to be a $300 million company and you're very profitable. That's not the venture out for that type of fund. There's smaller funds, things like that, but it's just what you consider, because that means you just have to continually grow. And there are some businesses where that's important. You need to be like, like for me, for example, we're always growing,
Right.
but for us, it's very important because actually there's a compounding effect of the improvement of the product as we grow and get more folks on. But there are
Right.
some business where I'm like, maybe don't get venture, maybe get, maybe get a different kind of capital because you could be profitable. And I think that's important because you're right. It also adds on like, a different type of stress where you have to commit like, okay, this is what it's going to be for the next 10 years or so.
Yeah. You kind of sign up for your level of pressure on the basis of who you take in capital from in a lot of ways.
Yes.
That will dictate even, yeah, the type of partner and then just generally your capital constraints every time you do raise like that literally dictates almost, and you try to fight it and keep the team insulated from those things, but that sort of dictates the decisions you end up making and like the
Yeah.
game and the rules you play when you decide anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious right now, like, independent of maybe like fundraising, what do you spend the most time on in your business, whether it's sales or product or
Yeah, that's a really good question. Probably much to the team's dismay right now. We had a CSM leave on maternity leave for the, you know, last or for the next few months, a customer success manager. I volunteered to hop in and take all of her accounts just because, it had been so long. For me, it had been
yeah.
like maybe 4 years. And we've just spent so much of the last like 2 to 3 years building out these like table stakes enterprise features that like all of our larger competitors have, but we don't, which means that we've deprioritized innovation and new features that we think could be really compelling. And I have felt like maybe I've been far from the pulse of the customers in a lot of ways. And if I am managing them, hearing their pains, understanding to some extent which bugs, chores, tasks should be deprioritized or prioritized relative to the most optimal path a customer success manager can take, like I want to understand the reasoning behind what we'll invest in like its most visceral way. So for right now, that's literally where I've been spending most of my time. And frankly, like kind of loving it. Again, much to the team's dismay. Like I probably need to dial it back soon.
What is it that the team dislikes most about you being on the CSM?
We've been so used to doing the job for the same way for so long.
Yeah.
We are able to evaluate success on the basis of how this job has been for so long. And we've just added a couple new features along with the head of analytics, which allows us to package the insights in a way that could be useful. That like the only way to do it is through like manually creating through like Excel some of these presentations and slides. So again, it's not the responsibilities of the customer success manager to do any of these things, but it's an amazing opportunity if we can surface some of the data, get some feedback on it, and determine should this go into quarterly presentation? Should this be inside the dashboard? Like things that sort of like for me, probably straddle the line between a few different departmental responsibilities. So it's
Yeah.
like, there he goes, he's off
Yep.
again, bringing. So I think in a way, the team loves it because it's like, wow, the like customers are loving it. They're answering our emails, we're hopping on calls. And I think the other side is like, can this guy just do his job? Like, what is he doing in this department? Like, we are in this department. Like, get the heck out of here. So it's probably
I
a bit
know.
of that
Yeah, I know the
balance.
feeling. It's
Yeah.
tough, but it's also I think good because, no one's going to ever apply themselves the way that you do as the founder. That just
Right. And I don't expect, yeah, and don't
yeah.
expect them to. It's a level of probably neuroses that like they
Yeah.
don't ever want to live at.
Well, one thing that also it took me a while to learn too. It's not just that like they, like yes, the founder's going to always work harder than everybody else. That's just it is what it is. But part of it is also like, when you have a job, let's just say that you're running, customer success or you're running support or you're running, whatever the thing is, like you're focused on doing that thing. And you feel like you might be stepping on toes if you do something else. So, when you're the
Completely.
CEO or the founder, like you do whatever, you know what I mean? And so that's a part of the struggle sometimes too, is that like sometimes they're just like, I wouldn't even think to do that because I didn't want to sort of step on someone else's toes.
Right.
And for you, it's like, I'll do it, whatever it is that the customer needs, I'm going to do. And it is a cool cultural thing to figure out, is like, how do you
Yeah.
get everybody on that sort of like first principle thinking of like, how do you help the customer in whatever, world you're in?
Yeah, for sure. And then also, yeah, sharing with the team like justification for even doing it. Like, are we all aligned that I'm going to be mildly disruptive for the next 3 to 4 weeks, trying to elevate some part of our department to a point that could serve us and our customers and like maybe in the roadmap 3 months from now. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's you definitely have to communicate it to everyone to understand like why this is even happening. And then typically after that point, the hope is that it's generally accepted. It's viewed as less of a threat to the status quo and more of like, this is really good for the company and the department. And then from that point, it's like, all right, cool. Like it's less of something that's bothersome and more like, I understand what it feeds into and
Yeah.
generally
Yeah.
hopefully be accepted.
Cool. We're going to talk about Tattle a bunch now, but before we do,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you something that like, I'm just super curious because you and I both, I think, grind a lot and work a lot. And,
Yeah.
I have two kids. So like my day is
Right.
kind of nuts because I'll get up before the kids and do some work, exercise
Yeah.
or something. And then when the kids go to bed, I'm doing more work. And like at nights, I don't know when to call it quits. I'm not, like, so sometimes I'm like, it's like midnight, 1 a.m. and I'm still working. And, usually for me, it's just like, okay, at what point am I it's such a cognitive despair that like
Right.
whatever I'm doing is going to not be nearly as good because I'm just way too tired. But I'm
Yeah.
curious for you, like, how do you like determine each day
When to
when to
call
just
it, like
stop?
that's
Yeah.
it. That's it. I mean, I think to a large degree, any founder entrepreneur is like an addict to their work in some way. Like it's a part of them in some way. So like the hardest things I've had to do over the years are like decouple myself from work. Like, how do I do that? And the things that I've had to do have felt like chores for years until like I start to enjoy those things. And then I'm like, you know what? Yeah, you know what? Maybe I'll play around the golf with my buddy. Like, you're right. Let's just call it at 4 p.m. on a Friday today because I'm going to be working later on anyway. So, like, whatever, I'm just going to get outside. Like, it's little habits I've had to really like wedge into my work to separate myself from work. And then just also surrounding myself with people who aren't in tech, really, like just as much people that,
Yeah.
friends, family members who don't relate to this. I find that to be like extremely refreshing. And now I feel like I gravitate to that more so just because it's just another great wedge to have. So like calling it quits, I think I know now that like if I'm working past midnight, I'm going to be like a little bit slower the next morning.
Yeah. Yeah. The sleep thing is a big one.
Yeah, big time. It's worse when you don't need a ton of sleep, though. Like you probably don't need a ton of sleep and you can still grind and you're like, shit, like this is not a reminder of how much, like
Yeah.
there's no like speed bump here. Like I'm flying through and I
Yeah.
need something different to remind me that like I need to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I need more sleep now than I did. I'm in my 40s and
Yeah.
it's starting to hit a little bit. I know if I get like 2 nights ago, I don't know why, but I just couldn't sleep at all. I got like an hour and
Mhm.
I was just dead. And I had some important
Yeah.
calls and I was like, I hope I was
Wait,
not
you got an
crazy.
hour of sleep?
Yeah. Yeah. I just couldn't fall asleep. I don't know. That's not typical
Yeah.
for me. Like
Right.
I fight for like at least 6, 7 hours
Oh,
of
you're a
sleep.
zombie. The next day
Yeah. Yeah. It's like,
yeah, it's zombie work.
like 3 cups of coffee and I'm still like, but I think the thing that I struggle with, I don't know about you, and I think you're right, and I have a hard time admitting it, that there's like some piece of this that's maybe an addict. I like to think of it more like,
John, what are you
you
talking
know,
about? Every
like,
founder is an addict. From what I've seen, which is why like I feel like people gravitate to being a founder because work for them is like an unfulfilling quality of dopamine. It's like, all right, I'm working and I like to work a lot and I'm working at this company, but like I want to own the mission. Like I want to own the decisions. I want the responsibility. I want more. This isn't enough for what I'm doing right now. That's one part, but
yeah,
the other part's like this needs to exist. It's my mission. But like I just feel as though it's like a inferior quality of what they need, and then they gravitate to something that's far more high octane that makes them feel alive and scared and like all the ways they want to feel that they're not getting from their current employer.
yeah. I mean, let me play the flip side of that, because I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
there's a lot of that's right, but just so I don't feel terrible about myself at the end of
It's
this
not a
week.
way. It's literally
Um,
just how
but
you
like,
are.
you know,
Yeah.
I think that there is part of it that is, find when you find a purpose and then you're just completely driven to that purpose. Now it is, no matter what, there's a toxicity to this. Like I'm constantly at all times thinking about my business. When I was cooking, I was constantly thinking about the dish and
Mm,
how to improve it. And what if what if I
yeah.
marinate it with this? And we should actually like cook it a little bit slower and longer. And you know what, like kaffir limes we got these fresh ones. And I would always be thinking about that at all
Yeah.
times. And
Yeah.
now, and with this business, it's not really much different. And I'm starting to get to the point. I mean, I have 2 kids, I have a wife, and this week was my son's birthday and my birthday. Mine was the day before my son's, and like I'm realizing, when it's for other people, I'll make time. So it's like
Right.
my sort of like hierarchy is like family, kids, wife, business,
That's amazing.
health and
That's good.
exercise, and then knowledge, and then at the
Mhm.
very bottom is like enjoyment. And I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't know if that's good, but like, even my birthday, my wife's like, "Oh, what do you want to do for your birthday?" I was like, "Oh, I got a big day actually. Don't worry about it." She's like, "What?" She was actually, upset, and understandably.
Yeah.
And because I just had to do it. I had a lot of work for, we have some
Yeah.
big stuff going on right now. And the next day she's like, "Well, I want to do something special for you for lunch." And I'm like, it's the middle of the day. I just don't think I can. And she's like, "Dude, this is like, I
Yeah.
can't do anything for you, and you don't want to do anything for yourself." And I'm like, "Well, we have my son's birthday, and
Yeah.
I'm making time for that." And I realized, like, is this just like what it is? I don't know if you feel this way, but like I have a very hard time like finding time for like myself outside of like the primary needs of like, I
Yeah.
make sure I exercise, I make sure that that I read at
Yeah.
nights and things like that. But
I mean, Josh, do you ever consider that maybe you're living your like ideal day every day? Like your
that's
ideal schedule. Like maybe you're already doing it and maybe you don't need to have like a day to enjoy, which is like getting drunk and like doing something wild. Like maybe that's just not appealing anymore. Just like not enduring.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of like going out and getting hammered with
It's
my
a
friends is
different
not
form.
really like, I don't really.
Enjoyment. What about like a round of golf? or like,
I don't play golf. I think the only thing that I
okay,
would like to find more time for is there's two things that I want to find more time for because I love
yeah.
poker and I mean
Mhm.
I love the game of poker. And I'd like to be able to find more time to play.
That's a
And
competitive. That's competitive. That's
yeah, but it's also just it's just it's fun.
yeah,
It's
instinct.
strategy. It's so there's so much strategy to it. Math. I mean, I love math. I really like fishing, and I'm trying to get into fly
Nice.
fishing. So I wanna find time for that. So I'm trying to force myself
Yeah.
now to like to find time for it because I also think I don't know what you think, but like it's probably accretive to the other side of your life too. Like the more personal, the more you take care of like these personal things, the more that it probably helps your your professional life.
Yeah, completely. I didn't probably notice that over the last few years too. There's like a law of diminishing returns the more you work in many ways. Whether like you just get exhausted or like the quality of your thought isn't as like clear, or you take things too personally and like your ego gets tripped up in some of your decisioning. It's almost
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, in your formula should be like all the things that you've added before your business. Like that's amazing, just from like a priority standpoint. Enjoyment being at the very bottom. Maybe you test it. This is
yeah.
like the
I know.
sad sick founder me. Josh, maybe you test it 1 quarter by adding in 2 hours of enjoyment time to see yeah, I feel like the more healthy you are, the more healthy you exude to your team, to customers, and then everyone feels more at ease.
I remember the day I like caught up with you. I think you were in LA. Maybe we were both in LA, but we
That's
maybe we.
right.
But I was like,
Yeah.
you said something. You're like, oh, I'm going on a date or something, and I'm like,
Yeah.
Alex is finally like not 24/7 working. This is amazing
LA was
because that's all you
really,
did for a long time was
I, you know,
just work.
it was like obviously everything is by choice, but like we survived off of I survived off of 40K in Manhattan for 2 years, which is ridiculous. Like
Dude, I survived on like 30 or 40K in Manhattan for like 14 years.
like then 20K. I mean, we're not comparing, but yeah, it's like it's tough life when you can't do much.
It's
Like you can't even afford dates. Like, do you want to go to a
yeah.
dinner date? You're like, oh my God, that's like my whole month's budget on chicken and beans. Like, how am I going to
Yeah.
pull this off?
That is the
Um,
one benefit of like cooking in kitchens, especially in like New York, is you can get paid crap but still be able to go to restaurants.
right. Yeah. It's probably like a nice network community. Even, yeah, like even servers I know. They're like, oh, come by this bar at like 11. Like, we'll all be there.
I just remember you. I remember talking to you early on and being like, "Hey man, what do you like? Are you dating or anything?" He's like, "I don't have time for that. I got to get this thing
Yeah.
scaled, and I work too much, and I'm not paying myself anything."
Yeah.
And I remember that was for a long time. It was way more than 2 years, man. You were
Yeah. It was, so I lived like 20K each year for the first two, hoping to get some capital raised. Then finally raised some capital, only 250K that we spread out for 3 years amongst a team of like five to
jeez,
seven people.
it's amazing.
So that like whole period was like 5 years of like I was constantly raising capital, like raising 5K, 10K. Like I don't know if we operated the first 5 years with having more than like 3 to 6 months of runway,
Yeah,
like at any point
that's
in time.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't exist in that world. I would.
Really? I still exist in that world. I honestly govern myself by just like ascribing some kind of metric or number to everything so I don't spin out. Like
Yeah,
everything at Tattle is typically really measured. I think it was probably annoying at first for everyone to be like, this is measured on this, this affects that, this and this. But like once you know all those things, it's like you don't feel as like emotionally impulsive anymore because you're like, you just see how the whole machine wants. And you're like, all right, if I can spin this small gear like a bit faster, then it can affect the big gear in 2 months up here. And like that's how I feel grounded, and
yeah.
don't spin out.
It's commendable. It's funny for as much as I am an entrepreneur, I'm also very like I'm somewhat risk averse. So like having runways like is one of those things like it's a tough thing for me to not know I have a.
Sometimes I wonder about like maybe because I'm not like I think you may have raised like more money than
Oh,
Tattle in
I've
like at least 75% less of like of the time. And maybe it's a function of like I'm going to prioritize this more because for me personally, I need it more. And then maybe on the flip side, it's like, oh, good, we have 4 months. It's great. Like a lot can happen in 4 months, and that's crazy in some ways.
yeah, yeah. Well, we need to talk about that more actually. But let's talk about Tattle.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
first of all, it's amazing and insane to see how much this thing has grown from what I saw to what it is now. essentially you guys are just like finding ways to quantify and qualify like all this sentiment from customers. What do you think has been like evolved most in the product over the last since you first started? Because when you first started, you were basically like digitizing the comment card, which is
Right.
a very
Right.
novel but really helpful thing. It's turned
Mhm.
into way more than that.
Yeah, that's all I thought it would ever turn into, frankly. I remember just like walking around, like Greenwich Village around Bark and just like literally collecting paper comment cards and being like, oh, this is going to be so easy. I'll just like take this piece of paper and I'll convert it to digital. And like, this is going to be cake. Like, I'll wrap this company up in 4 years. And you sort of get there. It takes a really long time to even get to that first concept. And then once you're there, it's like, oh, wow, there's like more utility from this data point than I ever recognized. Like, this is a predictive data point. Like how customers feel today will end up impacting what they do in the coming month or quarter and the frequency of visit that they'll end up adopting at that point. So it was like, okay, so throughout the process, like not collecting enough feedback was like the biggest barrier. Then once you start collecting feedback through like a digital medium, then it's like, all right, but what do we do with it? And then that became like the next 3 to 5 year journey. I'm like, all right, how do we categorize the information? How do we service it correctly to a general manager who might need to see something different than a district manager, who might need to see something different than like the global executive team of a larger mid-market enterprise brand? So that was probably a longer chapter in Tattle's period, just packaging data for the right people to take the action that they'd be expected to take within their role. And now the next piece is like, can you tell us like proactively what's coming and what
Yeah,
to do? And can you directly coach us better on how to directly improve satisfaction and revenue? And that's where I really do believe in like the next, probably like year or so, like we're going to come out with like a really compelling AI suite that will allow brands to operate like, operational AI assistants or agents to coach their GMs on the basis of Tattle feedback data that we collect and the brand standards that just any brand might uniquely have on how to improve speed or accuracy or how to the build steps of their new LTO or new menu item, like all those things. And I
yeah,
think that's going to be a game changer for every restaurant who has trouble inferring from the data that we collect or really like any data at all, anywhere from all the platforms they collect. And I think that's what we'll probably eventually move into because it seems to be like one of the best or first applications for like AI in respect.
yeah. I 100% agree. And it's not just like it's very helpful for your specific data if you're a restaurant, but it's also a very help or any business really. But it's also
Right.
helpful just in aggregate to understand pattern matching of things. And I think this is what's
Yeah.
really, by the way, I didn't think about it when you first started talking about Tattle 10 years ago either, because you think digitize the comment
Same.
card, like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. I'll get some feedback. I can digitize it. I don't need to like have a piece of
That was
paper
it.
anymore. But
Right.
the interesting thing is actually that feedback is way more impactful at a large scale, right? When there's statistical significance, because
Hmm.
if you don't have enough stat sig on a piece of feedback, then it could be skewed. It could just be like one
Completely.
day, one thing, but when you have that at scale, not only can you have a much better sense of the true north of something because you
Right.
have when you have enough people like saying the same thing, but yeah, I mean it's part of why Foursquare sold, right?
Yeah.
They were like a
Yes.
sentiment. What the sentiment data is actually, I think, wasn't it like an investment bank
No,
that
it
bought
was
them?
actually they became part of an alternative data set that hedge funds would buy on the basis
Yes.
of foot traffic. And the foot traffic that Foursquare showed at Chipotle, Best Buy, Apple became what hedge funds would use to like bet for or against certain stocks. And it
Yeah.
was like, it's funny. Early days Saddle would call hedge funds and be like, would you ever buy our data? Like, would you use it? Like, what would you use it for? And they're like, we have one person on every desk now that's designated to collect alternative data and use that for like how we would, sort of
Yeah.
like evaluate a stock. So it's true. It's like these alternative data sets are predicted in ways that obviously will help restaurants, but they're informing a lot of other things, but specifically foot traffic.
Yeah. And it makes sense why you have sort of moved into the sort of enterprise realm of these massively scaled businesses because there's so much
Sophisticated
more
data point.
impact. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think that's why we failed miserably the first 5 years at Tattle because we were selling into SMBs, 1 to 2 unit locations. And generally, what is prioritized on like their totem pole of priorities is not feedback. It's like my my chef is out this week. I'm flipping burgers, or like the hostess is gone, I'm guiding people. It's all the things that became like, how do we stay alive, as opposed to like, how do we look at our data and interpret what we should proactively do across our store? It wasn't, we
Yeah.
didn't understand that we were selling into the wrong cohort of customers until we started working with Dig In and Coffee Bean and Tea Room. And I'm
Hmm.
like, oh my God, they have a training manager. They have like teams of people that like take the data and then use this to dictate operational procedure and coaching. I'm like, oh my God, what have I been doing for the last 3 years?
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah. But what's
painful
also
lesson.
like just the data itself is just far more valuable at scale. I think for a one
Completely.
location group, you could make some myopic or short-sighted decisions based on data that comes in because it's not a ton of data. Like you only have, so many people coming in your door. There's a lot of variability to that. So you don't have the same like like a control that you could sort of measure against like 10 other of the same thing.
So true. The value only increases, I think, for larger brands, mostly because with the feedback data, there's like this micro and macro application. Like if you're a part of the executive team, you want to put people in positions for them to be successful. So collecting a ton of feedback on your top to bottom performing menu items and understanding how each of these menu items impact accuracy, speed, hospitality to some degree, like knowing that we ran a recent, we call it operational resilience formula that our head of analytics created. But we did a deep dive analysis of every single menu item on one of these burger chains, and we found we wanted to understand when guests give a 5-star accuracy for that menu item, what is the probability that they'll also give a 5-star for overall food quality? Meaning that when it's made pristinely, like how much do guests still love it? And we found that the burger that was actually generating the most revenue for the brand, so top line revenue, had a probability of a 5-star food quality rating when made with a 5-star accuracy rating of like 28%, when all the other burgers were like 40 to 50%. So the team had like no idea that they were setting their internal teams up to fail because there was complexity in the build steps that made it very difficult for the burger to either be accurate or look the same as the picture that
Hmm.
you use when you buy for off premise, that more guests were dissatisfied. And it was like, we're just creating churn in our business. We had no
Yeah.
idea. Like, why don't we set the team up to make easier, less complicated burgers that guests will come back and love more often?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
a GM can't do anything about that. They're just like, all right, you call the plays, I execute. But it's like, what if you call better plays for everyone to optimize the entire business operationally?
Yeah. No,
And that's where
100%.
there's like a ton of value at the enterprise side.
I totally see it. And but by the way, I do think it's also something that in aggregate can just help the industry, right? If you have enough of that
Oh my God.
data in aggregate, just like
Completely.
to understand like things that impact. I did want to actually ask you a couple questions just to see if you had some like insights into this that like just
Yeah.
generally speaking, like if you have you noticed, I mean, you guys have collected so much data on customer sentiment and feedback over the last decade. Like, are there, I have a few questions and you can kind of take them everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, are there any like really common blind spots that restaurants have that
Yeah.
they might not know about? And that, why don't we start there? I have some other ones, but like,
Yeah, I mean, that's a great first starter. I think what was the most surprising part of like the post-COVID era is that I believe restaurants maybe found a bit of simplicity launching off premise or having more orders go through that channel. When in reality, we continue to find that even today, any takeout or delivery experience is like 20 to 30% lower in guest satisfaction relative to the dining experience. And it's great that we're optimizing for these channels and we're making it more seamless, but we're actually putting guests in a position to reconsider whether or not they should come back at like a greater probability, which is not great for the economics of restaurants. So my big concern is I think the more you digitize the experience in some ways from an ordering process procedure, you denigrate the overall experience. So I love the simplicity of kiosks. I think you need them. I think probably average ticket prices have already proven to go up. I think speed will ultimately increase. I think accuracy will probably increase in a way too. But you're just bringing more of like aspects of the off-premise experience in store, which I don't know what will come from that yet. But like off the bat, off-premise is a far inferior ordering experience for guests than dine-in. So the idea is to optimize as
yeah,
much as you possibly can to dine in because they'll come back at.
it's also an inferior food experience, no matter what you do. I mean,
Yeah,
every piece of food you make, like every minute that it sits, is gonna
yeah.
be different. So
Completely. Like which affects temperature of the food. And then ultimately, if anything is inaccurate, you're 5 miles out.
yeah,
And like,
yeah,
you're like, no one's going to rectify my missing tomatoes. Like, what are we We just got to eat it.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so like, it's tough. I mean, some of this you just
Yeah.
can't get around. Like you're going to have delivery. You have to understand that it's going to be different. You order fries for delivery.
Right.
Like don't expect it to be nearly as good as in the store. But
It's funny. Fries are the most underperforming menu item across basically all of our partners,
yeah, that makes sense. That makes
despite them
sense.
being so popular. Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, I mean, first, like pizza is like the king, right? It's totally fine for delivery. Some
Yeah. I
pizza,
mean, it's tough to eat bad pizza for the most part, which is why we have so many pizza brands in the platform because you have to differentiate with better service.
yeah, yeah. I mean, unless you're doing like a Neapolitan style or like a high hydration, high heat type pizza, you're in a good
Yeah. You
spot.
know, the pizzas.
That whatever. But
Yeah.
burgers, there's a
Mhm.
ton of like delivery burgers, but burgers are take a hit, man, when they get delivered.
Yeah. You lived it. I mean, I don't think burgers are even in like the top 10 of our food cuisines. I think I got to look again at like how we categorize them, but I think like our steakhouses kill it for dining and off premise.
Steak is a great one because you can, if you're smart, you can account for the carryover cooking and get like a perfect steak when it gets to the person, and it's fine
Mhm.
if it's not piping hot, but you could also
Right.
reheat it, and I think
Right.
steak is a good one. All right, so one
Steak.
blind spot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a blind. I'm not gonna let you get off on that one because that one is like I think that's probably more known that like
Okay.
delivery isn't as good. But like, is there anything else that you
Well, even
found?
takeout. I think takeout is
Let me ask a different question that maybe will kind of like
okay.
be part of that then. Like, what are the biggest indicators that you've seen of things that catalyze growth in revenue or decline in revenue based on customer sentiment?
All right. So our head of analytics just did a deep dive last night. He'll be presenting for, I think, like the Ops Summit of one of our like 60 location brands. And they wanted to promote how important feedback is to their restaurants. And they wanted a few slides to highlight its importance. So he was looking at the data. So we collected their revenue data, their Tattle satisfaction scores across all their locations. And we basically found that the stores drawing higher satisfaction are also driving the highest year over year revenue growth at like those
I
groups of
bet.
stores.
Yeah.
So the idea is like, great, guests who are happy come back more often and therefore we grow more. So then it's like the level beneath that. Well, what do we do to most impact, guest satisfaction at our store? And I think
Yeah.
that what we've seen is that every single location is extremely different. Like for a 60 location brand like this, I think it's very customary for a multi-unit brand to say, hey guys, we're going to be clean, fast, and friendly this year with an emphasis on clean. So everyone, let's proactively focus on being clean the whole year. And the reality is like every location is different because the composition of the team's strengths are different. It might be in like a different unique real estate. Like we've just found in airports, like no one, for the most part, like speed isn't as prioritized as being friendly to people. Like maybe they're nervous. But in a hospital, like no one cares about friendliness at all. They care about like getting their food and getting out. So it's like every store is made different and has a different priority by which you should improve that one category that Tattle recommends for them. So whenever we recommend a category at the store level and they improve this category in any way, overall satisfaction goes up at an 84% probability. So that's like the game to play. So it's like if you
Yeah.
want to impact guest satisfaction, there's like a bunch of gears that wind it. And this is the most important gear that will increase your overall satisfaction the most. The hardest part is like, now how do you operationalize that?
Yeah. It sounds like it's dependent on the operating model and the type of like location that you're in and things like that, whether it's maybe urban or suburban or airport or not. But generally speaking, guest satisfaction drives revenue growth, which makes a ton of
It's
sense.
it's so it's like it's
Yeah.
borderline
Yeah.
cliche that it's that simple.
What's interesting is like if you think about like we're in the product led growth world and at Me's and just like build a good product, give it to people for
Oh
free and
yes.
let them use it.
Yeah.
And when you think about growth, there's acquisition, right? There's retention, there's
Mhm.
monetization, there's referrals, and there's I forget what the adoption. So there's these different levels of like how you think about like what are the levers of growth,
Yeah.
and the most important lever for growth you would think is acquisition. It's like get as many customers as you can. But
Mhm.
actually, the most important lever for growth, and it's the same for restaurants, by the way, is retention. is
Oh
because
yeah.
it doesn't matter if you gain, you think of it like the subscription service, like Netflix. I forget
Yeah.
what those things are called. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Netflix and Disney and Hulu, they all
Mhm.
have like horrific retention, right? So they basically churn the same number of customers. Other than Netflix,
Mhm.
all of them churn the same or more customers than they retain every year. And so it's like this leaky bucket, right? And it's the
Right.
same thing for restaurants, right? Like if you can just retain every customer that you have, then you're going to grow because you can also then start to do other things with them. And that means,
Right.
yeah, you got to have for me, I think like consistency is the most important part of any restaurant,
Mhm.
any business really, but like in restaurants, like if you can't give the same product, each time, it terrifies the customer. Like it terrifies me. If I like order something and I'm like, oh, I love that. And then I go back and it's not nearly as good. I'm like,
Mhm.
now I'm scared to go here again because is
Right.
the third time
Don't
going
know
to
what
be
you're getting.
good or bad? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And like that piece is like, it's also hard to measure that if you don't have, the data. Like how often is that?
Yeah. That's a really cool feature, by the way. Like to measure, like among guests who have come multiple times, like the delta of their consistency
Yeah. Cause it does put in this sort of level of fear of like, oh my gosh, now what's going to happen
completely.
next time?
Right. And it's even cooler to do it amongst like, all right, guests who came for their second time versus their third versus their fourth, like to understand the average,
Yeah.
maybe the average delta between each one. That's a cool perspective.
Yeah. I remember the other thing that we looked into that I think is somewhat common now, but we looked into Adorify is the impact of a menu item on retention. Like we would notice sometimes that like there's the highest selling menu item, right? And it's like
Yeah.
crushing it. But it turns out that like it just sounds really good and people love it and they
Right.
order it and then they never
Yeah.
come back.
Literally just went through that. What the customer I just told you, they had no idea that it was happening. And the reason why, and I love that like we're finally into menu items at Tattle because you guys have been holding our hand
Yeah.
for years. We found that the food quality category amongst our customers was the most correlative operational category to overall satisfaction. But the problem was like food quality could be like 30 different items for some of these restaurants.
Yeah.
So we had to spend like 5 months building out menu item level feedback so we could
Hmm.
actually see like which of these items should either be like we actually created this new analysis called menu, and it's we categorize menu items on what should be M magnified because guests love it, like magnify it, allocate more ad dollars, put it in more
Yep.
pictures.
Yep.
E, which is like edit, eliminate, like either get it off the menu or reduce build set complexity because like no one's like this is Russ Letting, and just like novelty, like it's like eating a hot dog at a baseball game, like it's maybe great overall experience, but like the hot dog kind of sucks and you're just glad to be
Yeah.
at the game. And then
Yep.
U is like untapped, which is like guests love it, but it's just not correlating to an overall high score. Like, what do we do with this thing? So
Yeah.
it's true. Like the more you can delve into those things, the more prescriptive you can be for a restaurant brand. The toughest part is that I think we're learning now that most restaurants are like, they're mostly just looking at revenue, which doesn't
Yes.
tell the full story because you can't really fix anything and you don't know the other side of like retention, which is like everyone hates it.
Yeah, exactly. Man, I would love to pull that information into. So we have this whole. I'll show you this whole menu engineering thing we built, but like because you have all the actual like true like margin data,
Yeah,
every single menu item in Mies. Like we've built all these
that's what we
analytics of
want.
like, yeah. I mean, so we have like the quantitative piece of like, hey, this thing is more profitable than this, but this sells more, and
Mhm.
this like. But if we could tell you, hey, this is more profitable, or send it to Tattle, it's fine. Like like
Right.
this is more profitable, but guess what? Like this actually drives this one here
Yeah.
drives the most retention of like repeat customers. And so if you could plot like the most profitable and drives the most repeat customers, that would be a huge insight to understand.
So what we can plot is like X and Y access data on the basis of, and this is messy. I got to fix this up. This is like a bit of just
Yep.
reckless graphing here. But yeah, X axis is the menu item level satisfaction. So you can see here,
Yes.
like lunch picks, pulled pork are like performing extremely high in like the 90 to 95 percentile. Gets a little bit lower here with like the slab of ribs, the kids' BBQ dinner. And then it gets really bad with other items like, like these here. So the idea and what I want to put in the Y axis is like margins or any other data point from like an
Yes.
economic standpoint that would indicate like guests hate it, but it has such amazing margins. Like, what do we do to simplify it? It would be better justification for edit and eliminate quadrant, which is like, we can't just like shoot it in the head. Like, we have to do something to try to fix it. And there's a basis to do that because margins are so great. So, like, everyone let's huddle and figure it out.
Yeah, I love that. So here, right? You see my screen?
Oh, so much
So
prettier.
like this has like, so this is pulling your actual menu item, and because we have like all the yields.
Awesome.
Yeah, and the thing is
Yeah.
like most people have that, but like no one actually has the margin data, because like you have to have all the like, how much do I lose when I dice this onion or chop this onion, and what's all
You'd
the
be
sub
surprised how many
recipes.
brands aren't aware of dog star eating.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, you know how this goes, right? This one is, most profitable, least profitable. But like, so if this insight was like, you have an 84% profit margin on this, that's pretty awesome. But if you could plot this not just on the quantitative, like how much money are you making on this versus another
Yeah.
one, but which one is driving the most like repeat business or new business and things like that would be
Yeah.
huge. You know what I mean?
Massive. Yeah, completely.
It'd be huge.
That's really cool. That's funny. We arrived at the same place, like just with our own data. Like,
Yes. Yeah. And the
yeah.
data I'm finding is like the most, we spent so much time on like, for us, like we live in the recipe world, and
Mhm.
I think most like sort of back office systems live in the purchasing world, and like,
Right.
and that's like, which is good. We live in that world as well, but like there's a step before that, like that everybody forgot about, which is like, hey, all your recipes live in these very random formats and Word docs and PDFs and spreadsheets and Google
Yeah.
Sheets and PowerPoints. And you really don't actually know what any of that stuff costs. And your back of the napkin is so wrong. And now that we're able to get, like, we spent so much time on this machine learning model to like ingest all this recipe data. It's crazy
No
how much,
way.
how fast it is to get this stuff in now. And so like sharing these insights is like, it's super exciting to be able to like show someone like, hey, this is actually what it's costing you.
Do you also feel though you have to educate them on top of making their lives easier? Like it's just not enough to make their lives easier. It's like I now need to teach you the science behind this whole thing.
It's a great question because it's tough. It depends on the group. Some groups are more
Yeah.
tech forward, some groups are more operations forward, some are more, like culinary
Yeah, it is a mixed
versus,
bag.
I think a lot of people just like tell me what to do, right? Like, so you have my
A thousand
data,
percent.
right? The thing here, this chart's awesome. Can you just give me the
Mhm.
10 insights that I should extrapolate from this? Like, hey,
Yeah.
you should increase this menu item by 30 cents because it's, in your area, it's actually like,
Yeah.
lower than most, and it's a really, people love it. And you should, change the wording on this menu item because it seems like it has really high consistency. But so people really like it.
AI can do that.
Yeah.
It's already doing that. It's boggled my mind, really. Like some of
Yeah.
the like very clear application
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
AI that I didn't think would be here for a long time.
I totally agree. Like we're plugging in a model to start to understand, like, to start what we're doing. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but like we're like going to let
Yeah.
customers just like ask questions so we can understand what questions are you asking, because then we can optimize
Right.
for those questions. But it's pretty exciting, man, to see like where all this is going.
Yeah, definitely. There should be like a Mies mascot, like hopping around the scatter plot, being like, "Hey, check this thing out!" Like you'd have like a chef hat on and just like bouncing around.
Oh my God. I'm just so like stoked to see like how far you've come and what you've built and what you're continuing to build, man. It's awesome. And I'm just really grateful for the friendship. I can't believe it's been a decade.
I have to share something. So I remember when I first met you, I was like, so much different talking to like a young guy who like understands tech. I'm like, I met this Josh guy at Bark. And then you, I think, did the coolest thing ever. So I've been building, like I quit my job and my friends all thought I was nuts because I chose to quit my job to then campaign and canvas like 3,000 restaurants every day, just knocking on doors. And I did that for like 2 years. I remember when we had the Tattle launch party at Bark. I don't know. Do you remember that? I have a
I
video
wish that
of
I
it.
could say I do, but I don't.
I have a video of it that I can share with you. And for me, that was a very profound day because I had like trouble articulating Tattle to people and friends. They didn't get it. They thought I was nuts. And then for that day, I had like 15 to 20 people that like were just like orbiting around what I've been doing show up, be like, oh, I get it, man. This is really cool. Like, this is great. Like, this is, but we didn't have the budget to do it like that. You put on the whole show. Like, you like made the food and it was like a Tattle launch party that you sponsored in a way, just like very indirectly.
That's
And it
awesome.
helped us raise some money and it just helped people know like what the heck I was doing. So that was really cool.
I
I'll send you the
can't
video. It
believe I
was a
don't remember
momentous day
that.
for me. You're like, I don't even remember that, man.
You know, it's funny. I liked doing that. I think we're similar. Like I like helping, and I did like launch
It's a
parties for
blast.
a couple writers and other
That's
restaurants, and
awesome.
it is fun, man. Well, yeah, it's been a decade. I was
Yes.
young back then, by the way.
Josh, you're
Yeah,
still
I
really
was in my
young, man.
early 30s back then, and you were even younger. You must have been like 20 something.
I was like 23, 23, 24, something
God,
like that. Yeah.
it's
Way
crazy.
back.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, in a decade, we'll have another conversation about all this.
I love it, man. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it was all my pleasure.